Hello again, lovely fifth graders. Okay, our next review assignment for this week is Chapter 6, Lesson 11, which is dividing decimals by whole numbers. Decimals by whole numbers is what we're going to see some examples of today. Okay, so our first example is there are 8 4/10 meters left on a roll of ribbon. Nancy wants to cut the ribbon in half. What will be the size of each piece of ribbon? Okay, so we only see one actual number here, but the other key that we have to look for in this word problem is what the word half means. And to split something in half means to divide it by what? 2. Okay, so we're going to do 8 4/10 divided by whole number 2. So the first thing you can see they did in the example is they placed the decimal point directly above the decimal point in the dividend. So here's the dividend, 8 4/10. We know that 2 is our divisor. And they literally, before they even started, they brought the decimal straight up. What we got to make sure when we divide at all times, and especially with decimals, is that we keep everything lined up, especially the decimal and especially the place values of the numbers. If you don't keep everything lined up, your decimal could be in the wrong place. And we should know by now, if the decimal's in the wrong place, that can create a completely different number. Okay, so we're going to divide with whole numbers. So we're going to look at the 2 into 8. So think about 2 times what gets me 8? That would be 4. Put my little multiplying here. So then I do 4 times 2 gives me that 8. Now I end up with 0, but just because I end up with 0 doesn't mean I'm done. If I ever have numbers that I still need to bring down, then I have to continue bringing them down until I don't have anything left. Okay, now I look at how many times can 2 fit into 4. I know 2 times 2 gives me 4. Okay, I end up with 0 again, and I'm okay with that because there's no other numbers to bring down. So my final answer ends up being 4 2/10. Okay, so there's example 1. Let's look at our next example. Okay, example 2 here. We have $6.54 divided by 12. And again, they show us right here. First step they did was they brought the decimal straight up. Okay, so we're looking at 12. We have a 2-digit divisor here. 12 divided by 6 and 54 hundredths. Okay, or 540 thousandths is what we see. Okay, so first I ask myself, can 12 fit into 6? Nope, because 6 is a smaller number, which is why they started with a 0. So then I'm going to look at 12 into 65. Now, if you have a 12's times table, you'd be able to figure this out. If you don't, then you can use our strategy of trial and error. I know that 12 times 5 would give me my 60. Can't get any closer than that. I'm trying to get 65. My 5 up here, subtract my 60. Okay, end up with 5 left over. Got to bring down my 4. Okay, now if I'm doing trial and error, I know that 60 is too big. Can't use that for 54, so let's go down 1. Do 12 times 4 instead. That should be enough to make it smaller than 54. Oh, and that gives us 48. Perfect. So put my 4 up top. Put my 48 right here. Please, boys and girls, remember our subtracting skills. I cannot take away 8 from 4. There's not enough there, so I have to borrow from the 5. That's going to turn into a 4. 4 turns into 14. So I'm left with 6, and then this would end up being a 0. Okay, then I need to bring down that 0 there. Oh, and if I look, I already did the trial and error for 60. It goes in perfectly 5 times. So that means when I do 12 times 5, it gives me 60, and I end up with nothing left. There's nothing else to bring down, so my answer ends up being, my decimal's in the right place there, 545 thousandths. Okay, so there's our second example. Look at these 2 examples now. Okay, so we have the number 1 over here. We have 48 33 hundredths divided by 3. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to bring this decimal straight up above the dividend. Okay, as long as I keep all my numbers and everything lined up, the decimal's in the perfect place. So let's look at our 3 into 4 first. 3 can fit into 4 one time. 1 times 3 gives me 3. Okay, 1, then I bring down the 8. Gotta ask myself now, answer it if you know it. How many times can 3 fit into 18, boys and girls? Can fit in 6 times. 3 times 6 gives me 18 exactly. And a reminder, even when you end up with that 0 at the end, if you still have numbers here to bring down, you've got to bring them all down before you are done. Okay, 3 into 3. Remember, anytime we're fitting it into the exact same number, that means it can only go in one time. And again, I'm ending up with 0. But why am I not done? That's right, because I have one more number to bring down. And then again, it's the same 3 again, which I know. Anytime I have a number fitting into itself, it can only fit in one time. Now, obviously, for the third time, I end up with 0 at the end. This is okay to leave because I have no more numbers to bring down. So my answer for this number 1 here is 16 and 11 hundredths. Okay, let's look at number 2 here. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to bring up the decimal right in between those 2 8s. Then I'm going to look 2 into 8. I know 2 times 4 gets me exactly 8. Okay. Everything was 0, but I'm not done because I have another 8 to bring down. And I just did this, so I know again, 2 fits into 8 4 times. I get 0 again, and I know I'm done because there's nothing else to bring down, which means my final answer is 4 4/10 on that one. Okay, let's look at our next examples. Okay, we're gonna have a little bit of a different thing going on for these ones, so let's see what we need to do. Okay, we have 12 4/10 divided by 8. I'm gonna bring up that decimal as my first step there. I'm gonna look at 8 and the 1 first. Can 8 fit into 1? Nope, so I have to add that 0 there. Now let's look. 8 into 12. I know 8 times 2 is 16, so that's too big, which means it can only fit in one time. I'm gonna put my 8 there, subtract that. 12 times, I can borrow if I need to, but I know it's just gonna be 12 again. So 12 take away 8 would give me 4, but I need to bring down this other 4 here. Okay, trying to think. 8 times 6 is 48. That's too big, so I got to go down to 8 times 5, which is 40. Okay, boys and girls, so here's where I want to talk to you guys because we have a remainder, but we have no other numbers to bring down. But I don't want to put remainder 4. We're talking about decimals here. We don't want to just put R4. I want to add on to my decimal. So what I'm going to do is, because there's no numbers here, I'm going to add a 0 and bring that 0 down to add. So I'm going to turn my 4 into a 40. And we already know 8 can fit into 40 5 times because we just did it. And that one should go in perfectly because that's 8 times 5 is 40. So now we got rid of our remainder. So instead of putting remainder 4, we changed it and it is 1 55 hundredths. Okay, let's look over here at number 7. I'm gonna bring my decimal straight up there in between the ones place and the tenths place. Okay, I'm looking at 14 into 1. 14 cannot go into 1. That is way too small. So let's look at 14 into 14. Are those the same number? Yep. Anytime we have the same number, it can only fit in one time. So 14 take away 14. Oops, that's supposed to be a subtraction sign there. Would give me 0. Got to bring down the 1. Now, boys and girls, here's the important part here. I can't just bring down the 4 again and add a 1 right here. We got to look at it first and say 14 can't fit into 1, so I have to add a 0 first. This is why it's important to make sure all of our numbers are lined up with their places, okay? So now that I added a 0 there, now I can bring down another number, but I cannot just bring it down because that would be a completely different number if I didn't add the 0. So 14 into 14 again would be 1. I have no more numbers to bring down, and I end up with 0 as my answer, so I'm good. So I want to make sure you guys are clear on understanding. The answer is 1 1/100. If we didn't add that 0 there, our answer would have been 1 1/10. Those are extremely different numbers, boys and girls. You've got to remember that when it doesn't fit into the 1, we have to add a 0 before we bring down that second number. These would not be the same answer. 1 1/10 would be a wrong answer on that one, okay? So make sure you watch your place values and your zeros. Okay, we have one more example to look at. Okay, So this last example has two parts to it. So the directions say to divide and also round to the nearest tenth. So the first thing we're going to do is divide, and then we will look at rounding to the nearest tenth on this one. So we have 7 and 21/100 divided by the whole number 7. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to bring up that decimal point right there. Now we can look at how many times can 7 go into 7? Well, that's the same number, so I know it can only go in one time. 7 times 1 gives me 7. So I have a 0 there, but I know I'm not done because I have numbers to bring down. Okay, now I ask myself, this is just like the last problem we did. Can 7 fit into 2? The answer is no, but I cannot bring this 1 down until I put a 0 above the 2, because that tells me that 7 didn't fit into the 2. That 0 is lined up with the 2 right there. I can't just pull down the 1 until I add the 0 as that holder there. Now that I added the 0, now I can bring down this 1 and ask myself, how many times can 7 fit into 21? 3 times. 7 times 3 is exactly 21. So on this one, luckily, I don't have a remainder. I don't have to add a 0 and bring it down because I have a remainder of 0. Okay, so our first step was to divide. But the second part of the directions say round to the nearest tenth. So let's remember how we round. So I'm going to write the number over here. So this is our answer. 1 3/100. We're going to round to the nearest tenth. So what I have to do is I have to figure out which one of these places is the tenths place. Well, it's the one always to the right of the decimal point. We got the ones place, the tenths place, and the hundredths place. So what I do is I underline the number in the tenths place, and then I draw my arrow to look at the number to the right. So just a reminder, when you're rounding, if you have a number 0 to 4, that tells you that the number that's underlined is going to stay the same. If you have the number next to it 5 through 9, that's telling you that you're going to round up and make this number 1 higher. Here we have 3, which falls into the 0 through 4 category, which tells me 0 is going to stay the same. So what I do is everything before it, 1's not going to change because that's before the underlined number. We just said 0 stays the same, and we follow everything after it with a 0. Now, if we know from our decimals, anytime we have zeros and nothing else after, we don't have to have them there. So we can get rid of them, and our answer rounded to the nearest tenth ends up being 1 whole. If you want, you can make sure you have the 0 there, or even 2 zeros, because having those 2 things there, it doesn't change it. That number is still just 1 whole. Okay, so make sure if it asks you to round, that you remember our strategy of underlining that place value that it's asking you for, and then drawing your arrow, and that you know if you have 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, your number should stay the same. And if you have 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, that rounds the number up. Okay? So make sure you know your assignments from your teacher today. If you're supposed to do the reteach lesson for this chapter and lesson, make sure you do it, and that you also go on to iReady. I've noticed, at least with my class, a lot of students are not going on and doing your teacher-assigned iReady lessons. I know Miss Kennedy and Miss Walsh as well have been assigning teacher-assigned iReady lessons for math. So if you haven't been doing them, get on today and do some of those teacher-assigned lessons, okay? And we'll see you for the next review lesson for math.